Hello, everyone. It's Saturday. Time to get into philosophy. So, what's up? What do we have today? Right. So, I make this channel to get people into philosophy. That is a long goal. It's going to take a lot of time and effort. And so far, with all the streams I've been making, I have been mostly practicing, learning about streaming, how to work OBS, how to be entertaining, just like how to last 4 to 5 hours yapping without tiring myself. All that is part of practice. Streaming games is fun. It's also good practice because then you have something to use as content, something to reflect or to show up on screen, and that is, I guess, entertaining is the word, or at least it draws attention. But just yapping, and presenting an idea, it's much more difficult. And I still want to practice more of that. So I really think that even in the space, especially in the spaces I hang out with, these vaguely leftish, progressive, non-normal cultural space that I inhabit, I really wanted to get into at least some language about ethics. Just getting people to understand the difference between deontology and consequentialism. Even that will be a huge step forward. But I'm not confident in my skills as a online presenter to do that just yet. Another thing that is always useful, always fun to have, is this introduction to mathematical logic, mathematical thinking, that people tend to cover in philosophy in what is basically the introduction to logic 101, logic 102 will be the intuitive equivalent. And it is simultaneously a mode of thinking that is very useful, but can also be very misleading. This type of thinking is necessary to function in the society that we inhabit. Maybe necessary it's too strong a word, but the society we live in, this technological, powerful industrial society that we inhabit, has in its foundations this type of mathematical thinking. This type of mathematical thinking also is strongly tied to what I've come to call a metaphysics of permanence. In mathematical thinking, objects remain stagnant, unchanging, unmoving. It is mathematical thinking that inspired Plato to make his philosophical system. It is mathematical thinking that affected Descartes and made him stick to this weird dualism that privileges the abstract mind over the material world. It is mathematical thinking that has taken root in economism and has abstracted the optimization of markets away from the living world. Nevertheless, mathematical thinking remains necessary to function in this world. So it is dangerous, but also extremely useful. Furthermore, mathematical thinking serves as a model of refutation. I covered this when I went over with Solaris, translating the first chapters of my thesis, but it's worth repeating. The idea that people can just come together and discuss something, and when presented with unrefutable evidence of the wrongfulness of one position, is for the most part a fantasy. That is not how statistically human debate works. Maybe that is how it should work, but it's not how it happens most of the time. There was one exception though, and that is the community of mathematicians, logicians, and computer scientists. Because in those fields, proofs and refutations are total. You can verify each and every step of the way to see exactly what was wrong. A mathematical theorem is, and this is gonna sound like I'm hyping it up, but once you understand, it's way less impressive than it sounds. A mathematical theorem is the closest thing we have to absolute truth. But it turns out that absolute truth matters and is a lot less useful than we would have preferred or liked. Most of the useful truths in this world are living and changing and relational. Mathematical truth, mathematical theorems are not the sort. They exist in this abstract plane of unchanging axioms and perfectly defined procedures. Nevertheless, this idea or this model of mathematical truth and mathematical refutation is extremely useful to practice as a form of mental discipline. And recently, a comrade known as Roderick Day on Twitter, let's see if I can share this without doxing myself this time. Okay, I know what to do. I'll go to the other screen, the black screen, and then come back. No, wait, I can't because see, this is what I mean when I have to learn. I have to learn more about how to work with OBS without making a mess of things. Okay, so let's see if I can do this in a smooth and elegant way. Nope, I jugged it up. Okay, better than otherwise. Let me zoom in real hard. So here, Roderick is talking about the type of people that initially composed Red Sails, which is a great resource site that I strongly recommend everyone to read if you're interested in a very methodologically strict series of Marxist publications. And here he mentions that, okay, he's replying to, we must create a situation where Marxism is more associated with engineers and scientists than it is with YouTubers and Twitch streamers. Oh no, I am a Twitch streamer. But, I mean, I am also not, if we, like, put the kind of vibe I have in a spectrum where that goes from theater kid to STEM nerd, I am definitely on the STEM nerd side. I do not have like the capacity or interest to be, you know, what people tend to associate with YouTuber and Twitch streamer. So Roderick says, I don't think I have advertised this anywhere outside of a few tweets and essays, but Red Cell's org was kind of undergirded by the feeling that this was missing. Almost everyone in its outer editorial group had an engineering, math, science, or architecture background. The thing is, the reason why this doesn't work out more organically is because the STEM scene is pretty awful. STEM, if I recall correctly, stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics, aka the hard nerds. As people come out in the comments, STEMies are relatively paid off, and culturally they bully each other into being good little submissive apolitical employees. To use a metaphor, we could say that the matchsticks are damp, unusable as Kindle. But if you painstakingly assemble a group of STEMies who are politically conscious, the intellectual rigor they bring makes the average humanities person collective seem fluffy by comparison. So, Roderick rubs a lot of people the wrong way, but he's right. Usually in the humanities, people don't learn what Roderick calls intellectual rigor. And if they do, in the humanities, people who learn this kind of rigor tend to be the people who study logic. And the people who study logic tend to associate themselves in what in philosophy is called analytic philosophy, which, although originally it was of a communist slant, in the later years it was basically hijacked by the Anglo-Saxon academia, basically the British and the United States academic spaces. And politically, they side heavily towards liberalism. A very progressive type of liberalism that worships John Rawls. I don't know if that's changed, but that's how it was when I was in academia. Anyways, let me continue. STEM trains and disciplines you into thinking in syllogistic terms. What a funny word. What is a syllogism? What is this syllogistic term he's talking about? It teaches that often there are correct answers to problems, that not everything is a subjective popularity contest or a hipster defiance, but also that such answers can be arrived through varied methods. Many non-STEM people get bewildered, sensitive to the arrogance of factual claims. When I got into politics, I kept being told, this guy always wants to have the right answer, like that was a bad thing. Well, as an autistic person, when people say you always want to have the right answer, what they really mean is you want to win this social encounter we are in. Because for most people, being right or having the right answer or having the reason is not so much about actually being right in a very detached, technical way, but about who gets to show some superiority in a social space. Mathematical thinking is a model of what Roderick calls intellectual rigor. And mathematical thinking disciplines you, and that's a very specific word he's using there, into thinking in syllogistic terms. What is a syllogistic term? that's what we're gonna cover today. So these tweets are what convinced me into doing a get into logic stream this in this sessions course. I don't know what to call it. But anyways, let's go back to the other document I had open. There we go. Okay. I picked up the study of formal or mathematical logic in 2010. That is over 16 years ago. Holy shit, I am old. Because I was initially obsessed with the idea of proving my own rationality. I wanted a method to prove in a social, political way that I was, pardon the language, not insane. If more specifically, not psychotic. This type of rigorous, disciplined, syllogistic thinking was not the solution I was looking for. But, like Roderick mentioned, it did give me a model of disciplined thinking, of arriving at factually correct answers through specific methods. Hello, Dharmadom. It goes well, I think. I've just been talking about why it's important to study mathematical thinking as a way of developing a mental discipline that is lacking in certain political spaces, and why it is about as close as socially necessary as I am comfortable using that term. But I also mentioned some of the risks associated with mathematical thinking. So yeah. Initially, I thought that logic was, a more verbal or rhetorical thing. And now, formal logic is basically math. Dharmadam says, I'm a decade removed from any math, but I did love it. So, I mean, maybe, hopefully, through this, I can get you back into mathematical thinking. And maybe get some people who think they hate math into enjoying math or understanding things that they have struggled for many years. Which reminds me, I thought I was bad at math myself, because I struggled a lot with understanding mathematics during middle school and high school. Turns out that autistic people need to be taught mathematics in a very specific way, with lots of foundations and lots of whys, because otherwise we just don't get it. Mathematics without foundations feels highly abstract and arbitrary to the autistic mind, so we just don't anchor it to anything. We just don't see, like, okay, but why? Why can't you do that? Like, I was taught to clear out algebraic equations, but it was never explained to me why I could do that. It was just given to me as a series of steps I had to take. And because they never explained the why, I mean, and they were under no obligation, because if you really want to understand the why, you need to do a lot of work. Yeah, I thought that I hated math. So consider my surprise when I started studying this formal logic stuff, and I realized, wait a second, you're teaching me math. Dormadom says, how does discrete math relate to this? I remember doing that with crazy symbols. So discrete math is a very broad category of mathematics. This is just like the very basics. Formal logic, understood as sentential or propositional logic, is binary calculus in a Boolean algebra. If you go to a more mathy route, you can then extrapolate that to other systems. Because, I mean, in propositional logic, we have this contrivance that we are dealing with truth and false, but we can easily talk about 1 and 0. And then we can just add more values if you want to. And then you can go that way. Or you can go through states and do what is called as modal logic. So yeah, I'd say that this is a particular form of discrete math, or a particular system. You can also do Thank you for becoming a Samigo. Yeah, a particular instance. You can also do automata. So think of it like a very basic course, which you can then extrapolate or expand into the admittedly much more interesting discrete mathematical systems. So yeah, what philosophers in this tradition of what do you call it, analytic philosophy or formal logic, basically do is walk the line as close as possible to mathematics and see if there's anything about philosophy that can be rescued from it. And one of the things I didn't like initially was that I was lied to. I mean, not exactly lied to, because some of the people believe it. But it turns out that the relationship between mathematical thinking and philosophy is not exactly as these kind of books present it. Did you say mathematical logic is Boolean? That surprises me. The most common one that is taught in Logic 101, yes. It's basically a Boolean algebra. Propositional logic is basically a Boolean algebra. We treat propositions as things that are either true or false. So we can change it to any binary value, 1 or 0. So something is or is not. Yes. That depends on the level of abstraction you want to deal with. In philosophy, they try to tell us that we're talking about truth and false, but that doesn't convince me. I think the system is too abstract to talk about true and false in any meaningful way. In fact, my graduate thesis is about how we probably shouldn't use truth and false and instead talk about philosophical logic or mathematical logic in terms of an information calculus. Whether the statement has a perceptible difference, which is the notion of a bit. But this system can be used to make, for example, electric gates. I really wanted to mention that in the post, that if you know propositional logic, then you will become a better Minecraft redstone engineer, because Minecraft redstone engineering is also a Boolean algebra. So yeah, in the system that we're going to cover in this Twitch course, we're going to deal with a Boolean system, so bits. How many symbols are used to manipulate? So we're going to use a finite but arbitrarily finite amount of propositional symbols, which we can use as A or B, or P's and Q's. We have an not infinite, but arbitrarily large amount of symbols. So the set of all the symbols for propositions is not a true infinite, but we can always add one more. And then we have the symbol for negation, and then the symbol for conjunction, disjunction, implication, bivalence, or if and only if. And I'm missing one. No, that's it. That, parenthesis, and some metalogical symbols. You can have equations of indeterminate symbols, like a function. Yes, everything, in the end, everything is functions. Yeah, but that is getting into the details, and let me start with like a more of a provocation of why this matters at all, or what even is the point. So, when people hear the word logic, they tend to have like these cultural associations that logic is something that smarty people do with their brains and all. And it's an open philosophical question, like what even is logic in the broadest of sense? For now, let's take as a working definition that logic, as a philosophical discipline, is the study of inference. And what is inference? The mental work of transforming a set of information into another set of information. That's how I'm gonna define it. An example of an act that requires logic and inference are deductive riddles. Not riddles that rely on free association or language games. These kind of riddles that give you all the information you require to solve the puzzle. One of my favorite kind of riddles are the knight and knaves puzzles. It is, I think, like a common joke in tabletop RPGs. You know, the hallway with the guard that always lies and the guard that always tells the truth. That is a knight and knave puzzle. So let me share a puzzle with everyone on chat. Assume there is an island, just an isolated space where things happen in a different manner from the ordinary world. And in this island, the inhabitants of this place, they are either knights or knaves. Knights always tell the truth, and knaves always lie. Immediate question: what does it mean to lie and what does it mean to tell the truth? Well, in the case of this island, lying is telling falsehoods, and telling the truth is telling the truth. Okay? Lying does not involve deceit or beliefs. It's just telling falsehood. That's how we're going to understand lying in the island of knights and knaves. So everyone that is an inhabitant of the island is either a knight or a knave. There's your binary. There is no people in between, or like a half knight or a sometimes knave. No, you're either strictly defined as a knight or a knave. And let's try a simple puzzle in this tradition. According to this old problem, 3 of the inhabitants, A, B, and C, which we can call Alice, Bob, and Carol, were standing together in a garden. A stranger, by that I mean someone not inhabitant to the island, passed by and asked A, Alice, Alice, are you a knight or a knave? A answered, but rather indistinctly, so the stranger could not make out what she said. Alice said, The stranger then asked Bob, Hey, what did Alice say? B replied, Alice said that she is a knave. At this point, the third man, C, Carol, well, third woman, Carol, said, Don't believe B, he is lying. The question is, What are B and C? What are Bob and Carol? Are they knights or knaves? Now, the interesting part of this is not the solution. The interesting part is observing yourself as you struggle with these thoughts. What is happening in your mind as you think of a possible method for solving this? What is happening in your head as you ponder, hey, like, but what does all of this mean? Do the thoughts come to your mind in an uncontrolled and confusing pattern? Or, as Roderick said, do they come in disciplined, slow, deliberate, syllogistic terms? What interested me initially about logic was this practical method, this transformative discipline. The idea that my mind, and thus my entire existence, could change if I learned to apply these methods. And it really did. My thoughts were a lot more hostile, stressful, before practicing this type of mental discipline. So, what are B and C? Is B a knight or a knave? Is C a knight or a knave? Thankfully, we have some free space, and because I am not using some Adobe product, I can do annotations. So the good thing is that, since this is the island of knights and knaves, B is either a knight, which I shall use the letter K, or a knave, which I shall use the letter N. C, likewise, is also a knight or a knave. So I have two entities which can occupy two states each. So I can have four combinations. Either both, that was awful. Either both are knights, one is a knight and the other is a knave, one is a knave and the other is a knight, or both are knaves. This table covers all possible states related to this question. If someone is familiar with algebras, that must be ringing some bells. Because yes, this is a mapping over a type of possibility space. Now, let's take the first state, the first possible state of things. Both are knights. If both are knights, both are saying the truth. When B says, A said that she is a knave, we're assuming that is true. Let's imagine that A said that they are a knave. If A said, I am a knave, then if she's a knight, she's lying. And that's impossible. If she's a knave, she will be telling the truth, which is also impossible. So no. Through this reasoning, through this slow, methodical, stubborn method of thinking, I have to conclude that no, well, B cannot be a knight. B cannot be telling the truth because that will point to an impossible situation given the rules. So this state of things is not possible, and likewise, this state of things is not possible. So we must be in a situation where either both are knaves or where B is a knave and C is a knight. But let's see what C says. C says, don't believe B, they are lying. Well, since we are forcibly in a state in which B is a knave and therefore lying, then C must be telling the truth. And therefore, we are not in this position. C is telling the truth, which means they are a knight and not a knave. So, necessarily, that's a very strong word, B is a knave and C is a knight. Tiny little text. Even that is tiny. Damn. Okay, there we go. That is readable. That was an example of the type of thinking that is common among mathematicians, logicians, and computer scientists. Most people need to train and have like some sort of exercise to be able to think in that way consistently. And that is what made me fall in love with logic. Logic, if properly understood as a philosophical discipline, is not so much about, I mean, there is always a lot of knowledge, things you memorize and study and learn. But in order to truly get into logic, you need to transform a bit of yourself. It requires this acclimatization into a different type of thinking. That is the mental rigor that Roderick talked about, and the mental rigor he wishes more Marxists will have. And I agree. It's an extremely useful way of thinking, and it's extremely useful in a political setting because it is a model for accepting being wrong. If I believe after this that B is something other than a knave and C is something other than a knight, I am wrong. There is a detailed step-by-step process that proves beyond any doubt or refutation that B is a knave and C is a knight. That kind of strictness is chaffing to many. It can be read as arrogant. And yes, it can lead to disastrous modes of thinking. Sometimes, yes. But for the most part, it is useful, it is good, it is what gave us modern mathematics and computing. Curiously, the way to understand the limits of this thinking is through this thinking. Maybe one day we'll go over Gödel's. Gödel's? I don't know how to pronounce it in English. In Spanish, we'll say Gödel. I don't know if that makes it in English. Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorems. They are extremely fascinating. But yeah, that is a type of thinking that formal logic wants to model. And so I go to another book. Is this Enderton? Yes, this is Enderton. This book is A Mathematical Introduction to Logic by, okay, so page 11 in Roman numerals. Let me show the cover. Yeah, this is A Mathematical Introduction to Logic by Herbert Enderton. We use this book for metalogic, which is like Logic 301. And it is definitely a try-hard book. It is not for, I won't suggest for beginners. We're gonna pick and choose a bit over several logic course books. But I like in the introduction. It is, I don't agree with everything, but it is useful to get a general reader vibe. So let me read out loud. Symbolic logic is a mathematical model of deductive thought. Or at least, that was true originally. As with other branches of mathematics, it has grown beyond the circumstances of its birth. Symbolic logic is a model in much the same way that modern probability theory is a model for situations involving chance and uncertainty. I really like the idea that this is a model. This is a construct that we build to be similar to a phenomenon that we experience otherwise. It is not the thing itself. It is a proxy. It is an external artifact, a tool that we use to understand a very particular mode of thinking, deductive thought. I also like the idea that this does not cover all modes of thinking. This is a very specific, diminutive part of the human experience. So, how are models constructed in general? You begin with a real-life object, for example, an airplane. Then you select some features of this original object to be represented in the model, for example, its shape, and others to be ignored, for example, its size. So, before planes are designed, they need to check the aerodynamics of a plane. And they do that by putting a scale model of a plane in a wind tube. And then they use like computer modeling and a bunch of sensors to see how the air pressure flows around the wings and so on. I don't know much. I don't know much about flying planes or aerodynamics, but that's more or less the general gist or understanding I have. We do this because we're not going to build an entire ass plane before we know it works. The model selects the useful parts or the relevant parts, the shape, and ignores or abstracts the parts that are not relevant, like the size. So when you build a model, you always engage in a process of selection and abstraction. Then you build an object that is like the original in some ways, which is called essential, and unlike in other ways, which we call irrelevant. What is essential and what is irrelevant is relative to the properties we want to study. For aerodynamics, size is not relevant. For weight tolerance and stress tolerance, size and material are essential. So don't be misled by the notion that there are some things like essential properties. This is just a figure of speech. Whether or not the resulting model meets its intended purpose will depend largely on the selection of the properties of the original object to be represented in the model. So there is a selection process. Logic is more abstract than airplanes. The real-life objects are certain logically correct deductions, air quotes around logically correct. For example, the classic, the one everyone in philosophy knows, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. That is a syllogism. A syllogistic term is one specific sentence of this grouping of three statements. And since they are in a syllogism, the first two statements provide a backing or a guarantee, in the case of deduction, this is a deduction, to the third statement, that is the conclusion, and we show that this is a conclusion by this word, therefore, signaling what is called an inferential nexus. Basically saying, hey, this is when the information calculus takes place. The interesting part about formal logic or mathematical logic, and why it is so abstract, is that the validity of inferring the third sentence, the conclusion from the first two, the assumptions or premises, does not depend on special idiosyncrasies of Socrates, or any meaning of these words. The inference is justified by the form of the sentences rather than by empirical facts about mortality. It's not really important here what moral means. It does matter what all means. So, the content of the words is an irrelevant element. The function of words such as all and therefore is what is important. The same structure is repeated in this nonsense Jabberwocky thing. Borogroves are mimsy whenever it is brillig. It is now brillig, and this thing is a borogrove. Hence, this thing is mimsy. It is, once abstracted, the same thing. The reason why this sentence, this thing is mimsy, is true in relation to these two sentences is the same here and here. So, the purpose of mathematical or formal logic is recognizing these common structures or functions. Again, we can recognize that the third sentence follows from the first two, even without the slightest idea of what a mimsy borograph might look like. That's not relevant. Logically correct deductions are of more interest than the above frivolous examples might suggest. Depends. In fact, axiomatic mathematics consists of many such deductions laid A to end. Yes, but notice he's talking about axiomatic mathematics. Most proofs are not as axiomatic. Proofs tested or done by computers are a sequence of deductions laid A to end. These deductions made by the working mathematician constitute real-life originals whose features are to be mirrored in our model. That is one possible interpretation of what mathematical logic is about. The logical correctness of these deductions is due to their form, but is independent of their content. This criterion is vague, but it is just this sort of vagueness that prompts us to turn to mathematical models. The philosophical question is, okay, what is form and what is content? A major goal will be to give, within a model, a precise version of this criterion. The questions about our model we will initially be most concerned with are these. What does it mean for one sentence to follow logically from certain others? If a sentence does follow logically from certain others, what methods of proof might be necessary to establish this fact? In pure logic, we don't really talk about facts. We just talk about true in a model. Facts tend to be more about, actually doing science. Is there a gap between what we can prove in an axiomatic system, say for natural numbers, and what is true about natural numbers? Because truth and provable are not the same thing. Hello, McWaggin. Thanks for the hydrate and stretch. It goes well. I am less rusty than I thought. Is there a gap between... Okay, you just talk about how truth and provable are not the same thing. Are there things that are true but we cannot prove, and there are things that we have proven but are not actually true? I mean, those questions sound highly abstract, but let me provide an example. Let's say that you, in your very subjective experience, go out to the forest and find a genuine chupacabra. And the chupacabra bites off one of your fingers. That is, in this model, true. Chupacabras exist, and one of them bit your finger off. Yeah, the chupacabra took away one of your juvies. That is true. But that is an entirely different problem from how do you prove it. So, I mean, it's a silly example, but... Hell, Columbo. The show Columbo, which is great and I strongly recommend it. The entirety of Columbo is about how Columbo can prove the guilt of the murderer. We know who the murderer is and how they do it. But the entirety of the episode is about how Columbo can prove it. So yeah, truth and probability are different things. And ideally, we want a system that can prove anything that is true, and anything that is true can be proven. And that if we prove something, that happens to be true. We don't want to prove things that are false. So what is the connection between logic and computability? Everything. Everything. Computability is... Until you get to hardware, computability is logic. So yeah, if you're interested in any of this, in computers, mathematical thinking, mathematical proofs, well, this is the Twitch stream for you. Actually, we will present two models. The first, sentential logic, or as is most commonly known, propositional logic, will be very simple and will be woefully inadequate for interesting deductions. That's just like your opinion, bro. I mean, yes, compared to first order logic, propositional logic is for babies. But propositional logic is what you use to make Minecraft Redstone, and that's great. Its inadequacy stems from the fact that it preserves only some crude properties of real-life deductions. I guess. The second model, first-order logic, is admirably suited to deductions encountered in mathematics. Yes. You can also have like a real-ass programming language out of first-order logic. I think COBOL is first-order logic. Let me check if that's true. Is COBOL first-order logic? No, it's not. It's another. Really old computing language. Well, yeah. First-order logic is a much more powerful system, but I still don't share the sentiment that propositional logic is like completely trivial. When a working mathematician asserts that a particular sentence follows from the axioms of set theory, he or she means that this deduction can be translated to one in our model. That is true. If after this course you want to get into set theory, first-order logic with some extra elements is all you need. And set theory is the closest thing to a common language in modern mathematics that we have. It's really powerful, really good stuff. This emphasis on mathematics has guided the choice of topics to include. This book does not venture into many-value logic, model logic, or intuitionistic logic, which represent different selections of properties of real-life deductions. Okay, that's another good bit. We are not logical chauvinists in this stream. We are basically logical fuckboys. We fuck with many different types of logical systems, and we don't believe that any of them is inherently better or the winner or whatever. Thus far, we have avoided giving away too much information about what our model first-order logic is like. As brief hints, we now give some examples of the expressiveness of its formal language. First, take the English sentence that asserts the set theoretic principle of extensionality. Okay, this is why we use Enderton for logic 301 and not logic 101, because the guy goes from 0 to 11 just like that. He immediately starts using these magic words. What the fuck is extensionality? What the fuck is a theoretic principle? It just means that it is a very basic rule about sets, And sets are a very funny mathematical object. And sets are things that are completely defined by their extension. Basically, what things belong in a set. The extension of a set is the identity of the set. That's what it means in less opaque language. If the same things are members of a first object as are members of a second object, then those objects are actually the same. This can be translated into our first order language as for every x and for every y and for every z, if every c that belongs to x also back and forth that same z's belong to y, then x is the same thing as y. So yeah, I can translate that into something approaching English because I've been doing this shit for years. I know that sane people just see a bunch of squiggles and lines and go, what the fuck is that? Well, this is math. The point of translating sentences into symbols is to remove all associations and psychological thoughts about what we're talking about. So what does all mean? This means that when you're talking about sets, if this is true, then this is true. If you have two bags, let's imagine they're bags. I mean, sets are not bags, but they are like a visual metaphor. And in bag 1, bag X, you have Mario and Luigi. And in bag Y, you have Luigi and Mario. Well, turns out that those bags are, for the sake of set theory, identical. They are the same thing. Even if one is Mario and Luigi and the other is Luigi and Mario, yes, because the order of things does not matter. It only matters what kind of things are inside the sets. That's it. Is that true? Because we make it to be true. Because we define sets this way. It is true because that is what we define sets to be. Really, it's not a deeper truth. It's just circular. And I will not even attempt to talk about this one. I think this one's already baffling enough. We have given some hints as to what we intend to do in this book. We should also correct some possible misimpressions by saying what we are not going to do. This book does not propose to teach the reader how to think. The word logic is sometimes used to refer to remedial thinking, but not by us. The reader already knows how to think. Here are some intriguing concepts to think about. Yeah. The idea that logic is a mode of correct thinking is not something I want to... I mean, I initially thought it was, and was heavily disillusioned. Okay, so that was the introduction by Enderton, but we are not going to use Enderton just now because, as you saw, it's. I'll give you a preview. I'll give you a preview of what goes next in Enderton book. Useful facts about sets. So Enderton has this wonderful idea that in order to explain basic logic, first he's going to talk about set theory, which is much more complex than mathematical formal logic for babies. Like, yeah. This is not the suggested way to teach someone. You do not teach someone level 5 so they can learn level 1. I think this is useful if you already have some familiarity about certain mathematical notions. But what I want to, like, for me, this is the goal. This is what I want people to get into and read and understand without geeking out. And Enderton just says, okay, yeah, just open with it. So, no, let's not do that. Let's not talk about... let's not talk about infinites and multiplying infinites as Logic 101. Now, let's talk about this. Proposition logic. But we're not going to use Enderton for that just yet. We're going to use another book by Mendelssohn, which is also not good, but he has really good exercises. I really like the exercises in Mendelssohn. So let me check this. This is, okay, page 15 in Roman numeral. E. This is Introduction to Mathematical Logic. Discuss mathematics and application. Oh no, this is a series. By Elliot Mendelssohn, got it, yeah. And I was in page 15 with Roman numerals. So let's actually start the process of abstraction and turning statements into symbols, so we no longer lose our shit when we see a bunch of squiggly lines. The same exercise here, the same process of abstraction. This is the garden variety syllogism, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, hence Socrates is immortal. And then we have all cats like fish, Sylvie is a cat, hence Sylvie likes fish. The point of this is understanding that under a certain level of abstraction, these two structures are identical. And we can abstract from sentences to variables. All A are B. S is an A, hence S is a B. So we've gone from a sentence that has content to a sillier sentence, and then we went to the example of the Goro Groups and Mimsys, and then we have like this full abstraction. So it doesn't matter what I'm talking about. All that matters is the relations between statements. Everything that belongs to A also belongs to B. Those are those set things we talk about. That's why there were some things about set theory in that other book. But let's start with a more intuitive, even if less exact notion of set. Sets are just going to be things that contain things. Okay? Think of them like groups or classes. Even though I know that mathematically a group or a class and a set are very different. Okay? But I'm not talking about mathematically. I'm just trying to provide an intuition. Think of them as just collections of things. Everything that belongs in collection A also belongs to collection B. S is part of collection A. Therefore, using logic, using inference, S must also be part of collection B. It doesn't matter what A or B, cats or fish, mortal men, Socrates or whatever means in a linguistic sense. Mathematical logic does not care about the meaning of words in that way. Mathematical logic cares about the meaning of words that detail relationships between propositions. Words such as all, some, not, and, or, if this, then this, and so on, so on. Those are the kinds of words that mathematical logic cares about. Words that talk about relations between propositions. Yes, and those can be modeled as logic gates, and you can do electricity with that. The truth or falsity of the particular premises and conclusions is of no concern to logicians. Formal logicians, mathematical logicians. There are many types of logicians, and some do care about facticity. They want to know only whether the premises imply the conclusion or not. The systematic formalization and cataloging of valid methods of reasoning are a main task of this kind of logicians. So formalization is the process by which we make models, as Enderton suggested. When we make a model out of something highly abstract, and we care not about the content, but about the formal structure of things, we are talking about formalization. We just want the form the shape or the structure, not the content. That's why it's called formalization. If the work uses mathematical techniques, or if it is primarily devoted to the study of mathematical reasoning, then it will be called mathematical logic. Yeah, that sounds very logical. We can narrow the domain of mathematical logic if we define its principal aim to be a precise and adequate understanding of the notion of mathematical proof, which is the goal, which is the really juicy and fun part of all this scenario. The P's and Q's are secondary. The notion of mathematical proof is what matters. What's the difference at this point of reasoning versus logic? Logic, understood as this mathematical logic, is a way to make models of a very specific type of reasoning, deductive reasoning. There are many other types of reasoning. There's inductions, there's analogies, there's metaphors, there's comparisons, there's abductions or explanations. Those are all types of reasonings. We're only talking about a very specific type of reasoning, which is when we have all of the information, that is deductive reasoning. Impeccable definitions have little value at the beginning of a study of a subject. Yeah. The best way to find out what mathematical logic is about is to start doing it, and the students are advised to begin reading the book even though, or especially if, they have qualms about the meaning and the purpose of the subject. That is what makes mathematics so fucking weird. Because you actually need your brain to form new connections. You need some change in your thinking in order to start understanding mathematics. Mathematics is a very creepy transformative process in that regard. Although logic is basic to all other studies, said by a logician smugly, I mean, I don't agree, but let them have their importance. It is fundamental and apparently self-evident. Its fundamental and apparently self-evident character discouraged any deep logical investigations until the late 19th century. Kind of, but not really. Okay, so first of all, this is mostly true in the Western tradition. People in Asia have a different mode of logic and reasoning. And there were some examples of the study of logic, the most notable one being Leibniz. But for the most part, yeah, logic remained... it changed little since Aristotle and the Stoics all the way to the 19th century. The 19th century is when logic exploded as an area of study. Then, under the impetus of the discovery of non-Euclidean geometry and the desire to provide a rigorous foundation for calculus and higher analysis, interest in logic revived. Yeah, when people discovered non-Euclidean geometry, they finally realized that Greek geometry was optional. Not wrong, but optional. You can do geometries in very different ways. And it turns out that actual physical space is not Euclidean. This, by the way, completely ruined a large part of Lovecraft for me because, oh no, the monster with non-Euclidean geometry. Oh, you mean like real life? You mean like actual space we live in? Yeah, I guess. Real physical space is hyperbolic. It bends at weird spaces. This new interest, however, was still rather unenthusiastic until around the turn of the century. The mathematical world was shocked by the discovery of the paradoxes, that is, arguments that led to contradictions. That is false. That is false. Paradoxes are are even older than logic. People were making dumb paradoxes all the way back to Greek and antique Greece. It's not that paradoxes in themselves were new, it's that the type of paradoxes that were found out made people lose their shit. And yes, one of the most important one is Russell's paradox. Because the tool that was used to start building mathematics in the second half of the 19th century was what is now called the naive notion of a set. So Russell found out this paradox. and it is much more easily explained by this riddle or puzzle. Imagine there is a town that has a very strict rule about shaving. Everyone who goes to the one barber in the town cannot shave themselves. So you either shave yourself or you go to the barber, but you cannot do both. So you have two groups of people. Well, two groups of people who need shaving. The ones who shave themselves and the ones who go to the barber, and they are exclusive. You cannot be part of both groups. The question is, who shaves the barber of the town? There is only one barber. So the barber cannot go to another barber and ask for a shave. But if the barber shaves himself, he's breaking the rule, because you either shave yourself or you go to the barber. But the barber is the barber, and therefore cannot go to the barber to get shaved. Because if he does, he will be shaving himself. And that will put him in the first group. But then if he shaves himself, he cannot go to the barber. We'll put him in the second group. And he cannot be in both groups at the same time. Oh no! Well, the paradox, the real paradox is, imagine I define a set as the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. So you open the set, and inside that set you find a bunch of other sets. The question is the set itself, the one you first opened, inside the set? Is the set of all sets that do not belong in themselves part of its own set? Because if it is not, then it has to be. But if it is, then it cannot. It is the same problem as the barber, but much more abstract. So it turns out that you cannot define a set in the same way that people have been doing in the second half of the 19th century. You need to put like certain stops in order to what defines set. Cantor's paradox I will not go into. That is, again, some high theory set theory bullshit. These are much more amenable. The life paradox. This one goes all the way to ancient Greece. If I say I am lying, is that statement true or false? I mean, if it is true, then it has to be a lie, and therefore I am lying, but I will make it true, which means that, oh no, this, and so on and so on. If you notice, a lot of paradoxes deal with the concept of self-reflection and circularity. When statements talk about themselves, things get a little wacky. So why does this matter? Is this just like a bunch of silly language games? Well, not really, because if you want to build mathematics from pure logic, you need to make sure that your logical system does not have this kind of holes, does not have this kind of self-referential paradoxes, because once you have a paradox like this, in an abstract model, it behaves like a contradiction. And contradictions in deductive logic make everything explode. Well, contradictions in classical logic make everything explode. Means that you can prove everything, which makes it bad. If you have been part of any type of STEM work or work in a factory or in any kind of system that requires checks, having a system that can prove everything is analogous to saying that the system will validate everything. Everything you put as input will pass, will check out, will say it's good. And that in a factory line is disastrous. That can lead to death, misery, and explosions. So yes, people started taking these silly riddles way seriously in order to have a logical system that work. In order to fully understand this, kinds of phenomena is why people started doing formalization, and well, even more specific and abstract formalization, until we only have the funny little symbols and squiggles we saw earlier. The purpose of that formalization is to do away with as much as unnecessary elements, irrelevant elements, as Enderton will say, to only get into what matters for the sake of doing mathematics or logic, and eventually computation. Okay, so the logical paradoxes, of which we mostly saw Russell's paradox, involve only notions from the theory of sets, yes, whereas the other ones we don't care about not occur within the standard mathematical language. For this reason, the logical paradoxes, or the paradoxes that rely on pure logic, are a greater threat to mathematicians' peace of mind than the semantic paradoxes. So this interest on seeing what is exactly a purely mathematical relationship and what contradiction emerges from the meaning of words is a big motivator behind trying to formalize as much as possible. You know, the idea of grounding things in pure mathematics, kind of necessary. Analysis of the paradoxes has led to various proposals for avoiding them. All of these proposals are restrictive in one way or another. Of the naive, okay, that's just historical notes. Maybe I can do a live reading of. Oh, what's the name of this book? The name of that book is really good. Logicomics, which is a short comic style history about these mathematical studies. So what is interesting about this is that what we call classical logic is about 100 years old. 1910, 1913. So this is around the time of the First World War. And one of the greatest praises I can give to this development is that it gave us computers. I don't know if I can read this. I mean, this is just like historical note. This is the good stuff. So some exercises to see if we're getting somewhere. This sentence. This entire sentence is false, or 2 plus 2 equals 5, to prove that 2 plus 2 equals 5. Can we prove that? Okay, let's take some notes. Tools, annotations. This entire sentence is false or equal 5. So this is a circular self-referential sentence from the first part. What would happen if this entire sentence is false? Not the sentence, like the actual thing itself, this thing. In order for this sentence to be false, both statements need to be false. Thankfully, 2 plus 2 equals 5 is false under standard arithmetic, so that is already false. But in order for this entire sentence to be false, in order for that to be false, then we will need to add not everything in this entire sentence is false. Which means that in order for this entire sentence to be false, not everything in the sentence, entire sentence needs to be false. Which means that since the first statement is a self-referential paradox, the second part needs to not be false. Which will mean that we have to prove that 2 plus 2 equals 5. But again, 2 plus 2 equals 5 is not a logically defined element in this. It's just noise. Once we have mastered enough abstraction, we can say this sentence is false or P. Where P is just whatever. And this sentence is false, we will model as a contradiction. So, and we will use this symbol to talk about contradiction. T stands for truth. So, contradiction or whatever else. I guess whatever else. If this sentence, if you put this into me as an input, as a premise, and you make me choose between contradiction or whatever, I will have to use whatever, because whatever has to be true if you tell me that this is true. I cannot accept that contradictions are true. Therefore, you are just feeding me P. Or in this case, 2 plus 2 equals 5. You're just basically telling me, accept this or a contradiction. I guess. And I don't know that this is a contradiction because you have not given me the rules of what 2 plus 2 means, what equals means. So you're just giving me a contradiction or whatever. Whatever, I guess. So that is a kind of clarity that formalization gives you. And again, this is another logical course book going from 0 to 11 in a vertical cliff of difficulty. And yeah, you thought God Hand was hard? Nothing on this shit. We will ignore that for now. I'll just scare people by seeing all the fucking set theory symbols and so on. This is logic brain, because this is the book basically proving, hey, all the shit I'm gonna tell you later is true because of this. But you cannot understand that this is true until after you believe me and learn the following. So I guess we'll ignore that for now. We can go back to this later. And this is what we're actually gonna start. So if you've seen my stream about how to argue, not how to argue, how to make an essay, we had an entire episode about declarative sentences. In the logical system that we're going to study, propositional logic, we're going to build our system around the notion of a proposition. A proposition is an abstract model of a declarative sentence. And a proposition is always going to be either true or false. Why? Because we said so. It does not have any further meaning or implication. It is not a philosophical commitment. We are not saying that statements are either true or false. We're just saying, okay, for the sake of this system, they're going to be either true or false. If that is too philosophically risky for you, their statements are going to be, propositions are either going to be 1 or 0. They're going to not carry information or carry information. They're going to be an affirmation or a refutation. Doesn't matter. What matters is that we have two states. Everything has to have one state, and nothing can have two states. So it's either or. That is what matters. That structure is what matters. So we will be talking about truth and falsehood in a very casual, non-committed way. We're not talking about truth and falsehood in a factual sense. It's just whatever binary value we feel like talking about. Okay. So we're going to take declarative statements such as what's a good declarative statement to start playing with? Mario wears a red cap. Any similarities to any Nintendo product are purely coincidental. I'm just talking about my tío Mario. Okay, so that is a declarative sentence. And we're going to abstract that as a proposition. And we're going to use the following symbols for propositions. We can use capital letters starting with A. So A, B, C, D, and E. Or we can use capital letters starting from P. P, Q, R, S, T, U. The reason why some people use P, Q, R, S, T, U is because when we talk about first order logic, people like to use the first letters for elements, for objects, and P, Q, R, S, T, U for relationships. But it's purely whatever is more clear to you. What matters is that propositions are going to be modeled as a capital letter. That's it. So Mario wears a red cap is going to be turned. No, not this one. Into A. In my model, in my abstract mathematical logic model, these two things correspond. When I use A, I'm going to be talking about the sentence, and when I use the sentence, I'm talking about A. Okay, that's it. Not much less. Not much more than that. Okay, and we're going to reach our first squiggle. So I earlier mentioned that a proposition is either true or false, 1 or 0, on or off. Well, one of the first functions that we want is the switch. Or in mathematical logic, negation. Although a sentence in a natural language may be negated in many ways, we shall adopt a uniform procedure, placing a sign for negation, the symbol squiggle, in front of the entire sentence. So, thus, if A is a sentence, then not A denotes the negation of A. So if A was Mario wears a red cap, then not A means Mario does not wear a red cap, or it is false that Mario wears a red cap. The way you phrase it in natural language is irrelevant. And by natural language, we'll mean language that actually exists, such as Spanish, English, or whatever. And we are going to define negation in this following highly abstract way. If something is true, then not A or not something is false. If something is false, then not A is true. That's why I call it the switch. It's just the opposite of what makes the original statement true. When A is true, not A is false. When A is false, not A is true. We use T and F to denote the truth values of true and false. Another common truth functional operation is the conjunction, and. The conjunction of sentences A and B will be designated by A triangle B or top B and has the following truth table. So imagine if instead of saying one thing is true, I want to say two things are true at once. If A stands for Mario wears a red cap, B stands for Luigi wears a green cap, then A and B is Mario wears a red cap and Luigi wears a green cap. And that statement is only true when both statements are assigned or given the true value. Why? Because we define it as such. It is an exercise in circular reasoning all the way down. Another reason why this works this way, if you're interested in working with algebras, is that this function selects the top value in the ring or the web. But it is highly abstract, and I mean, I just like to say those things for the sake of clarity and honesty, not to make people believe that this was made with the entirety of natural language in mind. Not really. A and B is true when and only when both A and B are true. A and B are called the conjuncts of A and B. Note that there are 4 rows in a table corresponding to the number of possible assignments of truth values to A and B. This is what we saw earlier. When we have 2 elements with 2 possible states, we have 4 combinations or 4 combinatory possible states. If we have 3 elements of 2 possible states, we will have 8. If we have 4, we will have 16. If we have 5, we will have 32. And then 64. And then 128. If you are a gamer, then you will know that corresponds with the leaps in console processor technology. The Super Nintendo was a 16-bit console, the Nintendo or NES was an 8-bit console, and the Nintendo 64 was a 64-bit console. They leapt a generation in processors there. And the reason why processors behave in the same way is of strict necessity. Processors calculate between possible states. A proposition behaves like a bit. And therefore, a byte that has 8 possible states has 3 bits of combinatory expression in it. The general rule is that it's 2 to the n power. Where n equals to the number of propositions. So 2 propositions is 2 times 2, 2 to the second power, which is 4. 3 is 2 to the 3, which is 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2, 4, times 2 is 8. 4 is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 16, no, times 2 is 8, bleh, times 2 is 16. Was getting ahead of myself. And so on, so on. That is how the combinatory space of propositions, of binary states grow, really. In natural languages, there are 2 distinct uses of or, the inclusive and the exclusive. According to the exclusive usage, A or B means A or B or both, whereas according to the exclusive usage, the meaning is A or B, but not both. So, hamburger or pizza. If we are living in an actual society, that is an inclusive choice. That means hamburger, that means pizza, or both hamburger and pizza. For the connective, that we will call or bottom, we're going to use the inclusive meaning. One or the other or both. So this function is true when at least one of the elements is true. If both are true, it is true. If B is true but A is false, doesn't matter, it's still true. If A is true but B is false, it doesn't matter. At least one of them was true, so true. But if both of them, or if everything linked is false, then it is false. Thus, A or B is false when and only when both A and B are false. A or B is called a disjunction with the disjuncts A or B. Another important truth function operation is the conditional, the if-then. Ordinary usage is unclear here. Kinda, sorta, maybe. It's more like, it's not that it's unclear, it's that it is highly contextual. Especially in the English language, when you add the subjunctive mood and all that stuff. If A then B is false, when the antecedent, which is the part ligated to the part linked to the if, we will call the antecedent, and the consequent, which is the part linked to then, is false. Okay, so what does this mean? An if-then statement is false only when the following happens. If I say, if I reach 100 followers, then I will open a Discord for this channel. That statement is true if the following things happen. If I never reach 100 followers, then I am under no obligation to actually open a Discord. If I get 100 followers and I open a Discord, then I also fulfill the statement. If I decide to open a Discord anyways, even if I'm not reaching 100, that's still true. The only combination or the state of things in which a conditional statement can be said to fail or be false is when I say, okay, if this, then that, and then the first part happens. So I am forced to provide the second half, or the second half should be true, or happen, or whatever you prefer. If the first part happens and the second one doesn't, then the condition was actually false. There was no such link between A and B. There was no such link between getting 100 followers and opening the Discord. This is unnecessary confusion. I mean, we don't care about what these connections between statements do in natural language. We're just talking about a formal language. And in this formal language, we will define by fiat that conditionals behave this way. That if A then B is false only when A is true and B is false. In all other conditions, it will be true. The reason why it behaves this way is because this conditional can also be used to do math. This function can serve as less than. Imagine, for example, that instead of true and false, we are talking about ones and zeros. So 1, 1, 1, 0. Oops, nope. They're not following the canonical order. Okay, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0. So if we interpret the implication as less or equal than, A less or equal than, is 1 less or equal to 1? Yes, it's equal. Is 0 less or equal than 1? Yes, it's less. Is 1 less or equal than 0? No! It is more, strictly more than 0. Is 0 more than equal, less or equal to 0? Yes, they're both equal. So, this makes a lot more sense if you imagine that you're measuring current. If you want to measure two currents and want to see which one is lesser, this gate is very useful. we won't care about the actual implications of the implication in ordinary language, because ordinary language is much more rich and complex. We are trying to avoid that for now. When we use if A then B in formal logic, we are not rescuing any sort of causal relationship. Causal. Yeah, like there's no causation between these elements. We're just saying that if the first happens, then the second one happens. And here, first and second is not a temporal relationship, it's just which one is the antecedent and which one is the consequent. If A, then B, in its most abstract way. So, really, this is not... I mean, some philosophers have made careers out of studying all the possible conditionals that we use in ordinary language and how to model them and so on and so on. I think that is, I guess that is interesting or useful if you are like really into language. But we don't need to go there. We're not talking about actual things with content. We are in a formal system and we're just studying the mathematical relationship between statements. That's it. So for now, we can just put all this in a big set of brackets and ignore it. No, we are not interested in justifying this. We're just saying it is because it is. It's circular logic, it's fiat. Don't worry about it. Okay, and finally, we have if and only if, which is the comparator function. It basically means this function pops up as true if the elements compared have the same values. It's usually called biconditional because it's a conditional that goes in both ways. And basically, it is only true when the elements have the same truth value. If both are true, true. If one false, the other true, false. If one true, the other false, false. If both false, true, because they are the same. And we will abstract those terms to these symbols, this set of squiggly lines. The conditional, you may also see it represented as a thinner line, like a thinner arrow, or as this symbol. This one is in disuse. I don't see it as much as often, but just for the sake of clarity, you may see it. So basically it is it a tilde? No, it's not a tilde. So the negation, you can also see it as the, in Spanish we call it virguilla, which is this, like the ñ. I'm gonna put it in chat. Like the Spanish ñ that has like a squiggly line on top. That's also often used as a negation. If you want to use, I don't know what exactly the negation symbol is called in the names. I just know it as a negation symbol. I think that's really the name, negation symbol. That's how it's usually known. Anyways, those are our sets of logical or propositional connectives. They are called propositional connectives because they connect propositions. Wow. And any sentence built up by application of these connectives has a truth value that depends on the truth values of the constituent sentence. So the thing about this is that, okay, you can build A and B. So you have A and B. This is a well-formed formula, or WFF, in our system, and this joins or connects A and B. But this is recursive. Once you have built a well-formed formula, you can use it as a proposition, or as if it were a proposition. So for example, you can say A or B or C. Now I am no longer joining propositions. I am joining what is called molecular formulas. Molecular because they are made up of other stuff. So any previously defined well-formed formula can be used as an element to build more well-formed formula. So once I have A, I can build not A. And once I have not A, I can build not A, then B. And so on and so on. Every formula I build can be recursively used as building block to a more complex formula later on. And because each part can be defined, its truth value can be defined from its building blocks, the truth values of the whole can be recursively analyzed as well. In order to make this dependence apparent, let us apply the name statement form to an expression built up from the statement letters A, B, and C. So A, B, and C, the base propositions, they're just going to be statements, forms, or whatever. And we have the following building rules. All statement letters, capital italic letters, and such letters with numerical subscripts. Numerical subscripts are just in the very rare occasion that we run out of A's and B's. So we have, imagine we have an extremely long proof, and we have used A, B, C, D, E, F, G all the way to Z, and then we have no more letters. Okay, we'll use A1. And then we'll use A1, B1, C1, D1, and so on. And we'll have another 27 symbols. Okay, we even use all of them. Okay, fine. We use A2, B2, C2, and so on, so on, so on. And because we have basically as many natural numbers as we want without committing to an actual infinity. Yeah, we have an arbitrarily large amount of statement letters. So statement letters, A, B, C, D, and so on, or statement letters with numerical subscripts, they are statement forms. If for any two statement forms, then so are the statement forms with a logical connective, a propositional connective. So not whatever, B, and whatever else. These are variables that have as domain everything selected in one. Everything that is a statement letter can be used in this way. And once you have a statement form, you can feed it back to 2 and build more statement forms with these rules, which I just showed. And only those expressions are statement forms that are determined to be so by means of conditions 1 and 2. This is known in logic as a closure clause. This is just saying, and nothing else. Because we have not explicitly said otherwise that this and only this is going to be a valid formula of our system. So 3 is that kind of really pedantic statement, but pedantry is the name of the game in formal logic. So this and only this is a valid formula in propositional logic. Some examples of statement forms are B, because it's a statement letter, not C2, because it's a statement letter with a subscript and a negation, D3, because it's a statement letter with a subscript, not B, and we know that not B is a statement form because it's B with a negation. Not B or B2 implies A1 or C2. Not A if and only if A, if and only if C implies B or Z. So the idea is that you start with the most basic parts and then you keep building and building and building and building until you get like extremely long sausages of symbols. That is called concatenation. We can just concatenate well-formed formulas. And if we follow these rules, these three rules, then everything that results from that is also a well-formed formula. These complex sentences, this complex formula, and the symbols we have enough expressive power to map out all possible combinatory patterns in our truth tables. So all possible sequences of truth values can be expressed with the symbols that we have and the rules that those symbols have in the terms of what they mean. For every assignment of truth values T or F to the statement letters that occur in a statement form, there corresponds by virtue of the truth tables or the propositional connectives a truth value for the statement form. That assignment is unique. So as long as you have a well-formed formula, there is only one string of truth values that fulfills it. Though multiple strings, the same string can have multiple formula that match it. Thus, each statement form determines a truth function, which can be graphically represented by a truth table for the statement form. For example, the statement form not A or B implies C has the following truth table. So first we have A, B, and C. Then we have the next in order of complexity, not A. Not A is the switch of A. So whenever A is true, not A is false, and vice versa. And then once we have that, we build not A or B. Not A or B is true whenever either of these parts are true. So for example, in this one, B is true, therefore the disjunction is true. In this one, both B and not A are true, so it's true. In this one, B and not A are false, so it is false. In this one, B is false, but not A is true, and so this disjunction is true. And then it repeats. And then we finally add the C. So the only place that matters to us here is, okay, it's true. Whenever C is true, it has to be true. Because the only case where a condition fails is if the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. So if the consequent is true, the conditional is true. So in these four states, C is true, therefore automatically true. In this state, C is true, but C is false, but the antecedent is true. That is the condition for falsehood for the conditional, so it is false. Likewise here, false, false is true, false, this true, and C false, false. This complete mapping out of all the possible combinatory states in this sequence of rows and columns is a truth table. And that is the first proof mechanism that we will learn. Each row represents an assignment of truth values to the statement letters A, B, and C, and the corresponding truth values assumed by the statement forms that appear in the construction of this, so on. This is another example. If A, if and only if B implies not A and B, is as follows. So first we have A if and only if B, which is true only when both have the same value, not A, which is the opposite or switched version of A. Then we have this conjunction, which is only true when both are true. And thus, A if and only if B implies not A and B. If antecedent true and consequence false, false. If antecedent false, automatically true. If antecedent false, automatically true. If antecedent true and consequence false, false. Now you will notice something interesting. that I can't select word shit in, cannot delete my doodles. Eh. This sequence, false, true, true, false, is the opposite of A if and only if B. So if we did a truth table of not A if and only if B, so this is A if and only if B, so this is true, false, false, true. And what does the negation do? Switch. If true, then false. If false, then true. If false, then true. If true, then false. Which is the same as this one. Which means that this formula and this formula, even though they look different, are materially equivalent. They have the same truth value. Truth values, plural. Sorry, my bad. If there are n distinct letters in a statement form, then there are... Okay, this I explained earlier. The rule of 2 to the n. A truth table can be abbreviated by writing only the full statement form, putting the truth values of the statements letters underneath all... Yeah, this is just like a more efficient way of making truth tables. Instead of putting A, B, and B over here and doing it part by part, you start with the letters, and you just put T, F, T, F, T, T, F, F, T, F, T, F, T, T, F, F. And then you first negate, so invert. And then this is the conjunction, so false and true, false. True and true, true. False and false, false. True and false, false. Because the conjunction is only true when both are true. So we have F, T, F, F, and then we do this, which is just true when they both match. Truth implies falsehood? No, that's false. False implies true? Yeah, whatever. False implies true? In false? Yeah, whatever. True implies false? Okay, and basically the same thing. So the principal connective is the last one in the building process. It is the one that gives the output of the whole formula. And we finally arrive to exercises. Let cross designate the exclusive use of or. Thus, A or B stands for A or B, but not both. Write a truth table for or. For this or, this is known as XOR. So it's really easy. So we have A, we have B. So in the canonical order, it is true, false, true, false, true, true, false, false, and XOR, or exclusive OR, A or B, but not both. Okay, so if both are true, we said no, so that is false. If A is true, but B is false, that is true. It's at least one of them is true, but not both. Same case here. It says just the other way around, false and true. And if both are false, then it's false. And if you'll notice, FTTF under the canonical order is the same as this. So XOR is the negation of the biconditional, and the biconditional is the negation of XOR. The rest, I am not sure I want to do on stream. I mean, well, the second one, I have something better. there used to be a lot of logic game for learning logic in Flash, but Flash is dead, and there's this program called Flashpoint, and while it has some Linux support, it will require me to jack shape, and I didn't really have the time to install that today, so maybe hopefully next week. But I found this. It's not as flashy, but it will do as substitution. We're gonna do some truth tables, and this is gonna be easier because it will automatically grade me. So we need to create a truth table for the expression P and Q or P by filling the indicated columns one at a time. So P and Q is only true when both are true. So true, false, false, false. If both are true, true. If at least one of them is false, false. Check column. Yes. But now I have P and Q or P. So this is the inclusive OR, and that is true when at least one of the parts is true. So in this position, P is true, P and Q is true, so it's true. In this position, P is true, so I don't care. Even if P and Q is false, at least P is true, so whatever. Here, P is false, the conjunction is false, both parts are false, so it's false. Likewise here. So P and Q or P, T, T, F, F, has the same value as just P. So this formula is equivalent to just P. Check column. Good job, try another problem. Yay! Hold on, let me make the screen a little bigger. There we go. Okay, how about some royalty-free music while we work? Let me see if this one's not cringe. No, kind of cringe. There we go, much better on piano. There we go, maximum smugness. Okay, we have to make the value for not R. Not R is the opposite or the switch of R. So if R is true, then it's false. If false, then true, and so on. So we'll just go back and forth like this. True, false, false, true, true, false, false, true, and so on. Check column, yes. Q and not R, so both of them need to be true at the same time. So false and true, false. True and true, true. False and false, false. False and true, false. True and false, false. True and true, true. And false and false. Check column, yes. Now, P or Q and not R. So as long as either part is true, it's true. So P is true in the first four states, so I don't need to worry much. So the first four is true, 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 true. Now I actually have to look at this. So false and false, false. False and true, true, because at least one part is true. False and false, false. False and false, false. Good job! P or Q? Easy. The first four states, P is true, so true, 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 true. False or true, true. False or true, true. False or false, false. False or false, false. Notice as I keep doing this, I need to think less and less. My thinking becomes more mechanical, more methodical. I ignore the meaning of the words and I just start calculating. So P or Q or R. So the only place I need to look for is when both are false. So in the first 6 slots, P or Q states P or Q is true. So true, Okay, check column. True, 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 true. R, true. P or Q, false. True or false, true. False or false, false. And so on. I can do this for hours. I have done this for hours. Lord, I participated in the Latin American, which technically makes it the International Logic Olympics. I think 3 times. I got second place once. So yeah. That is a very simple practice that we can do to get into this whole mathematical mode of thinking. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Bites. I am kind of smug about it. So this is some exercises we can do to start thinking a little bit like a mathematician. Through abstraction, by following precise rules, not thinking about the meaning of words, just say, if these are the instructions, I will do this. It's a bit of a programmer braining thing. And we need to engage in a little bit of programmer brain thinking if we are to proceed. And I think that's gonna be like the homework for this week for anyone interested. I don't know how easily accessible Mendelssohn's book can be. Okay, let's just say that if you're interested, I can help you buy this book in a very friendly and efficient way. If you want to follow it, you can just send me a DM and I'll give you a link to a store where you can buy the book in accessible prices. Otherwise, you can watch the VOD and use the bot to play around with this webpage, which has a bunch of truth table exercises so you can practice on. Well, I think that's it for today. I gave a brief introduction to what makes one possible answer to what makes mathematical thinking interesting. What kind of changes it makes in your mind? What are the benefits of this kind of disciplined thinking? And then we started with the simple but still formidable language of propositional logic. We went very briefly over how it is built, the connectives it has, the propositional connectives it has, how to interpret them under a binary combinatory model, which we call truth tables. And we even did some truth tables live on stream. And you can do more. You should do more if you're interested. Anyways, it's a bit late and I'm hungry and I want to upload this to YouTube. So I'll stop with this and I'll see you next week as we keep advancing in our adventure of mathematical logic. Math Maxer says Chandu16. We do be studying the basics of math. Oh, not already ending that. Yep. But there's the VOD if you're interested. if you're interested in learning the basics of mathematical logic, and we'll continue next week. Sorry that you got here near the ending, Chandu 16. Anyways, I'll see you all on Tuesday for gaming and next Saturday for more mathematical logic. This was Samuel, your friendly internet uncle that wants to help you get into philosophy, saying bye bye.